Should you or should you not change a Western grip? That's what we're going to talk about on today's Prodigy Maker Tennis Show, episode 103. I'm excited to be back with you guys. It's Chris Lewit, top American junior coach and coach to many number one juniors in the United States. And I'm excited to talk about this topic because this is a question that I talk about with parents all the time. And it's a common issue for junior players, and it's also an issue for adult players. But particularly with juniors, there's always the question, should we change this grip or not? I did another podcast. I'll try to link back for you guys to a few years ago, and it was called grip changes. I think the topic was grip change, and I talked all about when you should change grips, and this is sort of building on that podcast to a certain extent. Some of you who've been fans of the show for a long time may remember that show on grip changes. But this is a very complex issue because I don't think there is a simple answer. So right off the bat, I will say to you guys, yes and no. Yes and no. Yes, you should definitely change your Western grip, but also no, there are times where it may not be the best choice. And I want to kind of go into some of the reasons why you might want to change your Western grip and some of the reasons why you might not. And I'll just give you some of my experience from working in the trenches, for 25 years with top junior players and also with some serious adults. What do you do when someone has a real Western grip? So I would say, first of all, there is a common issue with identifying what is a Western grip because different people consider different hand positions Western. So without getting too into the weeds, for me, on the 8 bevel system of the racket, of the handle, the top bevel being 1, and then you have 2, 3 would be an Eastern, 4 is a semi-Western, and 5 is a pretty severe Western. And then some people go all the way over towards 6, which is basically like a continental grip, and you flip it over and hit the forehand with, sometimes I call that the Hawaiian grip. And maybe let's say right off the bat, that one I think you can make a really good case for almost always changing. If a kid shows up, or adults are a little different because adults, they may not want to change their grip. They may be in a place where they're just working with the game that they have. But let's take my experience with top juniors, working with all different, not only elite juniors, but I work with juniors of all levels, even from the very beginning, is a Hawaiian grip you almost always change because it's really hard to handle low balls, like if someone hits a slice or if someone hits a fast, powerful shot and it skids. Hawaiian grip is, remember, it's like a serve grip, like a continental serve grip that you turn all the way over, puts the hand in a pretty awkward position. The wrist has to really supinate a lot. It's like turning a doorknob. I never thought of that. There's a lot of supination that happens in order to get the racket face in the right, in the right position to hit the ball cleanly. And you just struggle on, it's very common to struggle on low balls, slices and fast shots. So that grip, I think, is not really viable at the high level, top Division I college and pro tennis. That being said, I had a few kids over the years who had that grip and they hit it pretty well. Would they have been better? Probably with a semi-Western or even a Western, probably. But that's a tricky thing to change when a kid gets to kind of a high national level and they're winning. That's when this debate becomes really profound and difficult, especially when a kid has achieved a lot of success with a particular grip. So Hawaiian grip, yes, almost always, yes, change that. And Western grip, so that's on bevel 5. Bevel 5, which used to be so taboo, like back in the day when I was growing up as a player and 25 years ago, just getting into coaching, I would say there was a common refrain that if a kid was on the 5th bevel with their index knuckle or with their heel pad, you got to change that because they just literally won't be able to play at the pro level. So that used to be the message that you heard in coaching and at high levels of the game, that you just couldn't make it with a bevel 5 Western grip. So I'm here to tell you guys that that is absolutely not true. There are many professional players now with what we call full Western grip. And full Western is with the index, imagine the index knuckle or the heel pad on bevel 5, which is the lower bevel of the racket. If you're looking at if you use the 8-sided way to diagram the racket, 8-sided diagram of the racket handle. And this grip can be used at the top level, can be used in top college, can be used at the pro tour, on pro tour. We know that. We have many examples of that. Taylor Fritz comes to mind. Jack Sock comes to mind. Karen Khachanov comes to mind. Not Nadal and Djokovic. They're close. They're close, but to me, they're between 4 and 5. And see, this is where people start to argue. I'm sure I'll get comments from you guys. Well, he doesn't have Western. He's Western. I mean, I had a guy, one of you guys just commented on one of my videos with one of my students who has a semi-Western, and one of you guys said, that's a full Western grip. You should change that. You know, we hear this talk all the time. And I was like, no, that's a semi-Western. So I think it is important. Maybe I need to write an article about it or some sort of visual demonstration of what a Western versus Hawaiian versus semi-Western is. We've done some videos on that in the past, but basically you can make it. Think of Swiatek, think of Coco, think of Andreeva. You have a lot of top females with Western grip now, full Western. And maybe a little bit less on the men's side, but you still have great examples. Rublev's close. He's close. You know, I think you have a lot of guys in between bevel 4 and bevel 5, and I would call that you could call it a mild Western or an extreme semi-Western. A lot of guys are in the extreme semi-Western area. I didn't realize that Fritz was that far over. He's a full Western the more that I analyze his forehand, which is just another example of how it is possible. I remember back in the day, you guys who are with me getting up in the years, you may remember a guy like a Wayne Ferreira or a player like Alberto Berasategui, who had probably one of the most severe Western grips at the high professional level. I believe Wayne Ferreira was also, you know, again, it's tough. That he might have been between semi-Western and Western. Great South African player. Brings back the memories, man, the 80s and 90s. You know, there's always been a few guys who, you know, Sergio Bruguera, great forehand, Spanish guy, was not as far over as Berasategui, but, you know, definitely between semi-Western and Western the way we'd talk about it today. But you always saw examples of pros who made it. Back in the 80s and 90s, they were typically clay court players. And so part of the messaging was, well, if you're going to have that type of grip, you can only succeed in South America or in Europe on red clay. You're not going to win any hard court tournaments. Like, that was a very common message, that A, you're not going to be able to play on fast courts, B, you might not be able to make the pro tour, and C, there are very few pros that actually make it with the Western grip. And in fact, I remember a lot of coaches, I've taken a lot of coaching education courses and workshops and things like that. I can remember being told that if you let your player have a full Western grip, you're basically limiting their chance of making it as a top player. Like, literally, you're undermining the player's development by letting them do it. It's like a catastrophic mistake in junior coaching, basically. And I'm here to tell you guys that that strain of thought is also not true. It's definitely not true in today's game. In today's game, you can be very successful with the full Western grip. So that's very important for you guys to remember. Let's see, semi-Western to Western, between bevel 4 and bevel 5, to me, that's the sweet spot. That's where you can get a lot of good spin, which is important for the modern game, and you can also handle low balls and fast balls relatively well. You can get down low and you can scrape them up. Doesn't put your wrist and forearm in such an extreme supinated position. It's still different than an Eastern, but you can definitely, you kind of get the best of both worlds. And that's what we've kind of seen both anecdotally and empirically from professional players. You see a lot of professional players, the majority of professional players, in my opinion, my take on it, are between bevel 4 and bevel 5. Maybe either a slightly milder bevel 4 or a slightly more extreme bevel 4, which I would say is a semi-Western variant. You have a mild semi-Western, or you have a extreme semi-Western, but not quite full Western. And definitely not Hawaiian, which is moving closer to bevel 6, or like basically a continental grip. You say that's a bevel 1. So you guys see what I'm saying? The most pros are in that kind of bevel 4 range because it just gives you the best options, the most versatility. And so either intuitively or through coaching, coaching experience, players have sort of gravitated towards that grip. We do have examples of guys even still playing with Eastern, closer to 3, like a Federer or now an Alcaraz, who's very famous now, and he has a very mild semi-Western to Eastern. Eastern is a bevel 3. You don't see too many pure Easterns anymore, but occasionally you see that from time to time. It just doesn't give you quite as much spin potential, which is a big part of the modern game, very important for the modern game. So that grip has become less popular. If you look in the 80s and 90s, there was a predominant amount of players with the Eastern, like a classic bevel 3 grip. You even saw some players like a Johnny Mack with a continental grip or some sort of composite between a bevel 2 and bevel 3. That also is quite, that has completely changed. So where you see very few players, I don't think there's a single pro with a sort of composite continental or Eastern these days. The only one I could think of that of recent memory is the Australian guy who's tall. I always forget his name. It drives me crazy. You guys can name it in the comments. The big guy made like top 20, and he had the very flat diagonal spin forehand. Big guy from Australian dude. He always forgets my name. You guys will remember. Anyway, doesn't matter. That grip structure is very rare. In the same way that in the 80s and 90s, the full Western grip is also very rare. And so everything's sort of flipped upside down now, because now most of the grips are semi-Western to Western. A small amount of grips are composite, like bevel 3 to bevel 4, or what I would say a mild semi-Western, kind of like Alcaraz or Federer. And you have no continental grip. I don't think, to my knowledge, there's no one on the tour playing with a continental grip forehand. So this is sort of the way the whole world has spun around, and we're in a very new place for technique teaching and building. If you have a player in front of you, you got to think in your mind, I would like this kid. I do this all the time. I have a young player. I'm building a young player. I want this kid to essentially end up, between bevel 3 and bevel 4.5, ideally. But let's answer the question, or try. What if a player has a bevel 5 or bevel 6? Like I said, bevel 6, change that. Try to change that. That's probably not worth it in the balance, of positives and negatives. The The bevel 5 is the real question, and that's where I'd like to say a couple things. Number one, it's not just a technical or biomechanical change. You have to remember that there's a human being in there. It's starting to sound like Yuval Noah Harari, if you know the philosopher and historian. There's a Homo sapien in there. There's a human being in there, and the psychology matters. So if a kid has a full Western and it's their best shot, and they love that shot, and they can hit it hard, so they can generate a lot of racket speed. I've talked about this in past podcasts. If they can generate a lot of racket speed, they're explosive. They have a good fast twitch fibers in their body. And they love it. And it's their best shot. I would recommend to coaches and parents and players out there, fans of the show, leave it. Don't change it. Work with that shot like Iga, like Coco, like Mira, like Taylor Fritz, work with it. Work with it and work on, you know what the deal is. You work on getting lower, scooping up low balls, practice that, and then make sure the player can drive through the ball. And another thing, it's really bizarre. I've seen a lot of juniors present to me with the full Western grip, bevel 5, and they don't hit spin. So I think that is equally bizarre. That's bizarre, and that should take a priority. Just like being able to handle low balls, just like being able to hit through the ball, a key developmental priority is generating a lot of spin with your Western grip, because like Iga does. After all, that is one of the huge advantages of a Western grip, is you can get a lot of topspin and make heavy balls that disturb your opponent. So if you're going to stay with the bevel 5 Western, full Western as we like to call it, work on low balls. So almost like counterpunching and defending against low balls. Work on driving through the ball for pace, because you don't want a spinny ball that has no pace or depth. And that's one of the big concerns that people have when they see a kid with the Western grip. They don't want them to hit like weak spinny balls. And then number 3, make sure that the player is generating a lot of whip and racket speed. That is very, very important. So if you can follow my drift, if a player loves a few criteria, if the player loves a Western grip, if the player feels that this is the way they want to hit it, they feel very strongly, they don't want to change. If the player hits it very well, hits it powerfully, can generate great spin, and can handle low balls, stay with it. If they're talented enough and they can do it, stay with it. You don't need to force a change. And so that would be my big advisement to everybody out there. And that can kind of ruffle people's feathers the wrong way, because there's a lot of people out there that are kind of diehard, like 80s and 90s guys, and they're still teaching the Eastern like a Lansdorp, like Lansdorp used to do. And I guess I disagree with that position. I think you should be a little more open-minded and understand that the game's changing. The Western grip is working. I have kids who come to me with the full Western and they say, my coach told me this grip, I can't play with this grip in college, or I can't be a pro with this grip, or I'm not going to make a living on the tour with this grip, or that I won't be able to do this. And I just think that messaging is not entirely accurate anymore. And it may never have been accurate, but it's not accurate now. It's not an evidence-based statement, because we know that there are many players with the full Western succeeding, making a lot of money, millions of dollars on the Pro Tour, and they're doing very well. So I would encourage coaches and parents and players to understand that aspect of the Western grip, and understand that you can roll with it, you can work with it, save yourself a lot of headaches, save yourself a lot of time in development working on changing the grip, because changing a grip is very labor intensive, time intensive typically. And that would be my advice. Try to work with it as much as possible. Now, on the other hand, let's say you have another, before I get to the other side, another for me, very important thing is, I believe you have a human being there, not just a machine, a robot that you're changing things around. So you can say, I know that this player could have a X% better forehand if we move from Western to semi-Western. They would be able to handle low balls better. Okay, great. You may be right, but there's a child there. In many situations, the child is a sensitive organism. The child may not be able to handle the change psychologically. So this is very, very important. If I'm thinking about changing, and then I can segue to when we would change, I need to know that the kid is resilient mentally and that they can handle the procedure, the process of changing a grip, which can be a surgery more or less. And some patients can't handle the surgery, and then you're better off with a more conservative approach. Changing a grip is quite extreme approach. So that's a very important consideration. Psychology. Does the player love this grip? Do they hit it really well? They have a lot of confidence in their forehand or not? And are they resilient enough to go through the process, the thousands of repetitions, the failures? Those can really weigh a heavy psychological burden on the player. So I would recommend to all of you, don't change a grip lightly unless the player is very, very young and they haven't reached a high level. They haven't done millions of repetitions in one way, and you can sort of get them in the early stages and just mold them. That is obviously ideal, but most players, they've reached a certain level of advanced tennis, and you may really shatter them if you force a grip change and it doesn't go so well. If they're stuck in technical land and they're unhappy, doing a lot of drills, this is where personality comes into play too, learning styles. Some kids don't like to drill. So if you have a kid who doesn't like to drill, or if you have a kid who is mentally a bit fragile, not super resilient, and they're really attached to that grip and that forehand, if you force the change as a coach or a parent, you could be seriously damaging your kid's mental game and confidence. And confidence is not everything, but almost everything in competitive sports. You need a player to be confident. I would much rather have a player who's mentally strong, confident with a full Western than a mentally weak player, lacking confidence, lacking a decisiveness, and not believing in themselves with the perfect grip. It's much better, in my view, to work with what's there depending on the psychology of your player. So that's another thing. I see a lot of players who are forced into a change, and yes, there may be a good change, but if you see how the player's actually performing 6 months or 1 year down the road, they're actually underperforming. They're actually playing worse than they were with the technically wrong grip. Okay, so those are some very important variables. So when should you change the grip? I mentioned Hawaiian grip. You really try to change it. Even in that case, you should take into account the variables that I mentioned. There's a lot of factors here, so it gets a little complex. To change a grip, ideally, this is another factor for you: athleticism, motoric ability, as my old coach Gilad Bloom used to say, motoric ability. Are they quick learners? Is the brain-body connection in terms of mimicking and motor programming strong? Are they very quick to learn stuff? Are they quick to learn a new stroke or a new movement in their body? Are they quick to develop a new motor program? And if they are, that's a great candidate for a change. And if they're not, you may be better off leaving it because that player has to rebuild a totally new neuromuscular, neural pathway, a neuromuscular link to make this new motor program, and it may take a long time and may be very, very frustrating. I mentioned the psychology. Is this player resilient? Do they have a lot of confidence? If they do, and you feel that they are mentally strong and that they can handle it, can the patient handle the surgery? Then that's a great candidate for making the change that you want to make. Parents and coaches have these talks and these debates all the time. These are the important factors that I don't think are usually in the conversation. It's just basically like a technique conversation, like the athlete is just an inanimate object. They're not a human being with feelings and, psychology and things like that. So, does the player like to work on technique, personality, learning style? Is the player more of a magician or a mechanic? If the player's a mechanic, that is, they like detail work, they're analytical, they like to do reps. That type of player is a great candidate for making a grip change. And usually those are the ones that have great success with a grip change. The player who is not mechanical, the player who is a magician, a classic magician who just likes to play and feel the game intuitively, does not like to drill, does not like to do baskets, really prefers to just play their way into great tennis shape. That type of player is not a good candidate for making a grip change, especially a forehand. If the player loves their forehand, and this is very, very serious, if the player loves their forehand, and if it's their best shot, I would say not a good candidate for changing. That's a major red flag for me. You're going to force that change on a player when they say to you, yes, I love this shot. This is my favorite shot. In a match, I love my forehand, and this is the shot that I'm looking for. This is my weapon. This is my number one go-to shot. I really hesitate to go in there and perform surgery with a grip change on that type of player. On the other hand, if the player says, Coach, I hate my forehand. I always miss my forehand in the net. I'm having a lot of trouble with my forehand whenever somebody hits me a low ball. Or, my forehand's too spinny, it's landing short, and I'd really like to get more depth on it. If a player's talking like that, and they say to you, I really love my backhand, but my forehand's a little shaky, that is an opportunity, that's an avenue to make this change, to really go in there and sell the change to the kid, get the engagement, get the commitment from them, and effect change. And it's likely to be a positive change. If they're working on it, the new forehand, and they say, my old forehand wasn't even that, in their mind, my old forehand wasn't that good, then they're going to be very open to learning this new stroke, this new grip, and also they're going to be less judgmental of themselves. They're not going to be longing for the old way, and they're not going to have, this trauma from losing something that they love, from losing a shot that was their go-to shot, and now they have no confidence in it. So I think that is also very, very important psychological factor. Does the player love it? Now, there's just going to be some coaches and parents out there, and I've worked with coaches like this. I've worked with a ton of parents. I've worked with parents of some of the best players in the world as juniors, some of the best players in the country as juniors. I've worked with all different types of parents, top business leaders, scientists, doctors, basically leaders of all different types of industries, really, really smart people with PhDs and lawyers, doctors. I've worked with hundreds of really successful parents, and some of them, they're going to disregard everything I'm saying here. Like for them, it's just clear science. Like one grip is better, And if the player has a suboptimal grip, they need to change it. Like they're gonna force the kid to change it. I won't name names, but I'm thinking of some parents right now, players that I coach that are obsessed with having the correct grip, the optimal grip. I'm just gonna speak to you guys for a minute or two and just say, it doesn't have to be that way. Look at the examples on tour of players making millions, doing great with what some people would classify as suboptimal grip. Many players are doing great. And I would encourage you to try to think holistically about your kid, or if you're a coach, your students, because a lot of coaches have these opinions, very strong opinions about the grip as well. Try to be open-minded. Try to think of grip as like parameters. Like there's a range of acceptability like this. There's not just one perfect grip, like the way Roger did it, or the way Sampras hit his forehand, or whatever. Like there's a range of acceptability, and in many cases there are things more important than the grip. Your kid's psychology, in my opinion, is more important than the grip. Your kid's confidence is very important. Your player's movement, your player's serve and strategy is very important. There are many other aspects to becoming a world-class elite junior and a world-class professional player, a top Division I college player. The grip of your forehand is not, if it's not way off the spectrum, if it's not a continental and it's not a Hawaiian, I think it's not determinant of where you can go. You can go to the highest levels of the game now with the full Western. People need to try to accept that. It's hard to accept, especially from some of us who are middle-aged, coming from a certain era where that was not the case and we didn't receive the message that it was okay to have a Western grip. Many parents may have had, if they were tennis players, may have had a coach change their own grip. And a lot of coaches changed Western grip to Eastern back, 20, 30 years ago. Very, very common. I remember the great coach Robert Lansdorf, I believe it was Robert, who said, if you let your kid play with a Western grip, they're never going to make it on the tour. Like, he used to say stuff like that. Very esteemed coach, very well-regarded expert in junior development. He used to say stuff like that. And I just don't think that's true anymore. And not everyone has gotten that message yet. So I'm delivering the message to you guys. I hope you appreciate what I'm saying. This is a multifactorial decision that you have to make. And the bottom line is, try to consider the entire human being in front of you. Can they make the change? Do they want to make the change? Is this really necessary for this player to achieve the highest level, to achieve their highest potential down the road? And make this decision carefully. Weigh the positives and negatives. Talk to your player. Have a conversation and try to work from there, analyzing all of the variables. And I think that will help you make a wiser decision. Also, in terms of the implementation, expect that it could take a significant amount of time, and don't play tournaments during that time. If this is like a really important tip that I didn't even plan for the show, just if you're making the grip change, you can't also play tournaments every weekend. So that's like a great way to destroy your players' destroy your players' psychology. All right, I'm going to force you. We're making this change. It's a hard change, but we're not going to take like 6 or 8 weeks off from tournaments. We're still going to play all of the nationals coming up. That's not possible. Don't do that. I've had parents do that. Take a break, acknowledge that this is challenging, and try to protect and rebuild your players' confidence and psychology, because it's going to be tough for most kids. Making a grip change is tough. Adults too. All right, guys, that's my best advice. I hope you appreciate the show. Talking about Western grips today. Multifactorial decision, lots of variables here. A challenging decision, a big decision for many parents, coaches, and players. Bottom line is, if your kid's not way off the spectrum, you can probably work with it and they can still be they're going to get that college scholarship and they're going to have a chance to be a top pro. I don't think you're sabotaging their long-term development as long as it's not ultra extreme. That's my message. That being said, if the player desires a change, if you really think it's going to be better, you can make that case. You've considered all the evidence, all the variables. Do it in a supportive way, in a positive way, and don't play all the big pressure tournaments while you're making that change. Take a break and work on that difficult change with some time off. All right, guys, I enjoyed the show. I hope you did too. I will see you on the next program. God bless. Episode 103 in the books.